You wake up and a schedule is already running in your head. Breakfast, then lunch, then dinner. Three neat boxes, spaced across the day, as natural to you as sunrise. You don't decide to eat three times, you just do. But it isn't how bodies work. For almost all of human history, nobody ate this way. The three-meal day is not biology, it's an invention, and hunger itself resisted it for thousands of years. To see how we got here, follow five things: the hunter's empty stomach, the Roman's single plate, the farmer's daylight, the factory's whistle, and the salesman's promise. So the question is simple: how did we go from eating whenever we could to eating exactly three times on the clock? The answer is stranger and more human than you'd expect. Starts with people who had no schedule at all. For our ancestors, food was never guaranteed. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not for days. Now, here is what most people get wrong. We picture early humans nibbling lightly all day, a berry here, a root there. But that's not how it worked. When you live by hunting and foraging, you don't eat on a rhythm. You eat when food appears. So they feasted. A kill meant gorging, because the meat wouldn't keep, and then they went without. But feast, or famine, is brutal on the body. So how did they survive the gaps? Because we are built to store energy, packing on fat in the good times and burning it slowly through the lean days. The Hadza of Tanzania still live like this. The anthropologists study them today. Their eating is irregular by design. That empty stomach wasn't a weakness. It was the engine that shaped our metabolism, and it lasted right up until we learned to grow our own food. Farming let people settle, store grain, and finally plan. And with planning came the first eating rules, but they look nothing like ours. Take the Romans, for example. We imagine every culture waking up to breakfast. The Romans didn't. Their day centered on one real meal, the cena, eaten in the afternoon. That was the event. Morning food existed, a light bite called the intacculum, but it's barely counted. And here is the part people forget. Eating much before midday was seen as moral failing. To rise and immediately fill your stomach marked you as greedy, weak, undisciplined. So the Romans ate once, seriously, and looked down on anyone who did otherwise. But an empire built on farms and soldiers needed fuel on a timetable, and that pressure, food shaped by work, would define everything that came next. Because once most people farmed, the sun set the menu. You ate around labor and daylight, not a clock. We assume dinner has always meant evening. It hasn't. For centuries, the main meal came at midday, and it was literally called dinner. The word comes from an old term meaning to break the fast, the first proper meal taken in the middle of the working day. Farmers needed the biggest load of food before the hardest hours in the fields, so they ate heavy at noon and light after dark. But daylight is unreliable. Winter shortened it, harvest stretched it, and the poor ate whatever the season allowed. Meals bent around the land, and the whole arrangement held firm, until people stopped working in fields and started working in factories. The Industrial Revolution pulled millions off farms and into miles and cities, and it did something no harvest ever had. It handed the clock, not the sun, control of the stomach. You'd think hunger set meals. In the factory, it didn't. The shift did. Workers ate before the whistle, and again when it released them. Eating became scheduled around the machine. Early on, that main meal still sat at midday. But here is the twist. Gas and then electric lighting stretched the day into the night. Work ran later, so the big meal slid to the evening. After the shift, and a lighter gap opened up the middle of the day. That gap became lunch, breakfast, dinner, and now a third meal wedged in between. The three-slot day had arrived, but one piece was still missing. Someone had to convince us that breakfast mattered, because breakfast for a long time was an afterthought. Then it was sold to us. You've heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That line wasn't handed down by doctors. It came from advertising. In 1906, John Harvey Kellogg helped turn cornflakes into a national product, and cereal companies needed people eating in the morning, every morning. But dry cereal felt thin, so the meal needed weights. In the 1920s, a public relations man named Edward Bernays was hired to sell more bacon. His move was clever. He got physicians to publicly recommend a hearty breakfast, then quietly tied that to bacon and eggs. It worked. A marketing campaign became a tradition, and the tradition became common sense. So the plate you picture in the morning wasn't ancient wisdom, it was one of the most successful ad campaigns in history. So here is the full picture. Your three meals aren't a law of nature, they are a stack of answers to very old problems. The hunter had no guaranteed food and answered it by feasting and fasting. The Roman feared moral weakness and answered it with one disciplined meal. The farmer was ruled by daylight and answered it by eating big at noon. The factory worker was ruled by the shifts and answered it by pushing dinner into the night. And the modern eater was handed a habit and answered it by believing an advertisement. Now you wake up, and that schedule runs in your head: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Three neat boxes, and not one of them was ever really about hunger.